Hi, Anjali. This is Dr. Kemry, and I'd like to review your mind map really quickly. So your central skill of teaching students insulin administration is appropriate. Andragogy is definitely a Knowles theory. He's one of the theorists that is aligned with that particular theory. And I find that your theoretical underpinning is correct, right? The view of that knowledge. The view of learning, that adult learners need to know why they're learning, and the role of the student is to work to understand the need to learn, right? The need to learn that particular piece of content. Here's where I diverge from what you wrote here. So education should focus more on the process than on the content. Content is important in adult learning theory and andragogy as well, but you need to provide that content in a way that the student, right, the learner, and the view of learning, that attaches to that content, right? So the content, the adult learner has to understand why this content is relevant, right? Why they need to understand the content. Process is important, right? And getting that process down in how to give insulin, but also the reason why, right? Why that process is important. And that speaks to content. Okay. So that's my feedback on there. Then you have constructivism. Bruner is one of the constructivists. There are many. Learners need to build, right, on their knowledge, which is correct. The learner chooses and transforms information, right, and kind of integrates that information into what they already know, right? And it's more than remember the knowledge, right? It's that they have learned the knowledge. So memorization is different from learning, right? So be careful when you use those terms, especially in an education context, right? And they want to build, obviously, on that knowledge, right? The role of the educator, right, here, that the educators need to address, right, their readiness to learn, which is valid, right? But they need to know where the students are, right? They need to understand where the students are so that they can attach this new knowledge to prior knowledge, right? And the theory should inform you in this way, right? Step-by-step guides for students to learn, that's fine, but they also need to be able to integrate these steps into something that they already know. So for example, when you're talking about insulin administration, right? And you're talking about maybe sub-Q insulin administration, some prior knowledge, some prior understanding that entry-level students might have is that prior knowledge of how to give subcutaneous injection, right? So to build on that prior knowledge of subcutaneous injection, or building on the prior knowledge of glucose and how glucose and insulin act in the body. Maybe that's prior knowledge that they have that you can build on, right, for that particular skill, right? So you have behavioralism. Okay? Behaviorism is definitely Skinner, right? Definitely a Skinner thing. He's the big theorist when you think about behavioralism, although there are others. Changes in behavior are results of stimuli. That's correct, right? Positive reinforcement, right? And then negative reinforcement, right? Or withdrawal stimulus, or a withdrawal stimulus, right? Which we often think about as punishment. That's usually not a learning theory that you want to use, right? So, because you're going to have your students focused on getting positive reinforcement and staying away from punishment, but I want you to think about what that does to the ability to learn. Our students that are trying to avoid punishment, right, and seek reward in an educational environment, are they going to be willing to take chances? Are they going to be willing to investigate and interrogate new ideas, right? So that can be a downfall of this theory. The role of the educator is to teach the student, well, yes, they're all to teach the student, right? To praise, that's correct, and withdrawal responses when those, when that response, withdrawal stimuli, when that response is not what they expected, right? Okay? So, how is that going to inform your instruction, right? Using adverse stimuli, taking away points from a student for completing a task incorrectly. I want you to think about how that's going to affect your learners, right? And awarding points if the task is performed correctly. If you want your students to learn a task, how do we learn tasks, right? Think about that. It's normally by repetition, right? We all learned how, we think about when you first learned how to write your letters, right? You practice that letter A, capital A, multiple times, and you kept practicing and practicing that skill over and over again until you got it right? Until you made it something that represented an A, right? But you didn't get negative reinforcement, at least from a lot of teachers, that, oh, that attempt was incorrect and you're going to get penalized for it. So I want you to think about behaviorism. And is that really a good theory, a relevant theory, when you're trying to teach people skills and processes that have to be repeated over and over again? Humanism, right? It's definitely Rogers, right? Experiential learning, right? Learning is accomplished by addressing needs and wants of those who are learning. That's true. They must learn through, you're saying here, and again, I want you to be really, I made a comment in your actual written post on the discussion board. I need you to be very careful about your writing and how you're presenting your ideas, because sometimes I get lost in the way that you're presenting your writing style. So I'd like you to focus on being more clear and concise, and perhaps having someone proofread your work, or maybe working with the Writing Center. Your use of words and your style is a little bit awkward at times, and using parentheses like you are to kind of denote importance might be better served if you used text to do that. So just be careful about that. Let's back to the role of the learner, right? That the learning is individualized, right? The role of the learner is individualized, right? So the learner has to take their own strengths and weaknesses, and actually, in experiential learning, have those experiences, if you will, to create knowledge and create meaning, right? And for the role of the educator, it's kind of opposite of some of what you would do if you were talking about behavioralism and Skinner, is that there would be a positive environment, right? So that all-encompassing environment, right? And that there be multiple opportunities available for students to practice, right? And help students to then experience all the different ways to actually do this process. How does that work for them, in other words, right? And then in that environment, again, the students have to feel supported in that environment. The environment has to be organized so that it's supportive, right? So that this humanism can be actually, that theory of humanism can be pushed through, right? That the students will be able to have experiences and they can be involved in something that's active, right? And actively learning that particular skill set, right? And they can attach that to kind of what constructivism is, attaching it to prior understanding and prior learning, right? But it's definitely experimental. So again, trying again, not really with a lot of punitive stilt to it, where behaviorism has that more punitive angle, right? So think about these theories and think about how you describe them each. So there were some issues with some of your description, and I hope I've kind of shown you that. If you'd like to, what I've seen here, if you're going to use the skills lab and the insulin administration, I would suggest you stay away from some of these theories based on just on my feedback, and it seems like maybe your understanding of that particular theory, and gravitate toward the ones that you feel more strongly about. If you have any questions about my feedback, please feel free to email me.